best cook. Story Andy illustration. Directed by Melissa Kinnaman. Designed by Julia. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Paul, whose dream was to be the best cook in the world. He always tried to cook food at home with various ingredients such as eggs, meat, and vegetables. Paul felt happiest when he was making food in the kitchen. One day, Paul's friends tasted the soup Paul had made. Yuck! It tastes horrible. Paul felt frustrated and sat down in a chair feeling depressed. Paul thought, I have no talent in cooking. That evening, Paul decided to make some soup that would satisfy his friend. Paul made the same soup, continuously and repeatedly, to make the best soup using various ingredients. Finally, Paul created some delicious soup. It tasted superb. The next morning, Paul invited the friend who had disliked his soup. The friend tasted the new soup and said, "This is unbelievable. I have never experienced such taste." Paul was extremely delighted. Paul wanted to learn how to cook from a professional chef who worked in a restaurant. Paul knew the best restaurant in town. He visited the restaurant to meet the chef. Paul, who wanted to be the best cook, met the chef and asked him to teach him how to cook. "It will not be easy to learn how to cook," said the chef. "Yes, but I am still willing to learn. I want to be the best cook in the world," answered Paul. The chef accepted Paul's request. Paul was allowed to work in the restaurant to learn how to cook. Paul had to work hard in the kitchen. He had to wash the dishes and mop the floor. When the chef had free time, he taught Paul how to cook dishes which he had never made before. Paul wrote the recipes down in his notebook and tried to make them on his own. Paul was very exhausted from all the work in the evening. Paul was always sleepy, but he could not give up. He had a dream to become the best cook. "I will never give up until I accomplish my dream," Paul thought. Paul was always tired and started losing his concentration during work. Paul accidentally broke an expensive dish while washing it. "What are you doing? Do you know how much that costs?" the chef shouted angrily. The chef would sometimes taste the food Paul had made to give him some tips. Paul served some spaghetti that he had cooked to the chef. The chef tasted it and did not say anything for a while. "It is too salty. Why did you use so much salt?" the chef complained. Paddle was terribly disappointed with the chef's evaluation of his spaghetti, but he started to cook again. Paul cooked a steak which he was confident with and offered it to the chef. "It's quite greasy. Do you think this is delicious?" The chef complained again. Several days later, Paul took steak again. He wanted to satisfy the chef, who was rigid about food, could not be satisfied easily. The chef who tasted the steak again said to Paul, "This is not any different from the previous steak. I think that should stop learning how to cook." Paul was tremendously sad. "Should I stop learning how to cook?" "Absolutely not. I have to make my dream come true," Paul said to himself. Paul decided to make delicious bread which he was sure the chef would appreciate. Paul studied a book about baking bread. He studied very hard and practiced baking bread every day. Paul made the dough many times to get it as soft as possible. He especially selected ingredients for the dough and baked it in the oven carefully. While the bread was baking in the oven, the king of the country was passing by the restaurant with his servants. The king, who was extremely hungry, smelled something delicious from around the restaurant. The king realized that the smell was coming from the kitchen of the restaurant. The king just had to enter the restaurant because of the aroma. The king ordered the chef of the restaurant to bring out the food. The chef brought the bread that Paul had made to the king. The king picked up a slice of the steaming bread with a fork and took a bite. As soon as he tasted it, he iced his words. The chef and the king's servants were afraid of the king, who did not say a word but just kept eating the bread. "Your Majesty, what's wrong? Is there something wrong with the bread?" the chef asked. The king answered with a smile, "I like this bread. I have never tasted such delicious bread before. Bring out the person who made this delicious bread." The king ordered. The chef brought Paul out. The king, who was very satisfied with the bread, praised Paul. "What an excellent cook you are! Your bread is the most delicious that I have ever eaten," said the king. "How were you able to make such excellent bread?" The king asked. "Thank you. I just did my best to be the best cook in the world," Paul said excitedly. "You are a very wise person because you did your best to make your dream come." "True," said the king. "I'd like to take you to my castle so that you can be my cook." Since then, Paul has cooked delicious food for the king in the castle and has become the best cook in the country.